Why does this mushroom look so strange? How many inches does it grow when it's fully mature? Does its name have anything to do with what people think it looks like? Why does it smell so bad, and what does it actually taste like? In this documentary, we're going to find the answers to all of these questions and more. In short, pretty much everything there is to know about this mushroom. Picture it. Somewhere in the damp shade behind a very ordinary suburban garden shed, tucked into a bed of wood chip mulch, a smooth white egg sitting quietly under the leaf litter. Nothing about it looks alarming. It looks, frankly, like a peeled hard-boiled egg that lost a fight with a lawnmower. 24 hours from now, that egg is going to do something that will make at least one homeowner call their spouse outside in a full-blown panic, phone camera already recording, voice already climbing into that very specific octave reserved for, "You are not going to believe what's growing next to the tomatoes." That mushroom is Phallus imputicus, the common stinkhorn. And yes, before you even ask, the name is exactly as blunt as it sounds. We'll get to that. We'll get to all of it, because this is a mushroom with a shape that alarms people, a smell that has been scientifically compared to human cancer wounds, a taste that genuinely has fans, and a 200-year history of scandalizing polite society so badly that a member of Charles Darwin's own family declared a personal one-woman war against it. This is not a boring mushroom. Let's get into it. Let's start with the basics, because if you've never met a stinkhorn in the wild, your first reaction isn't going to be scientific curiosity. It's going to be somewhere between a gasp and a nervous laugh, immediately followed by, "Wait, is that a mushroom?" Phallus imputicus belongs to a fungal family called the Fallaceae. Yes, that is the real, official, peer-reviewed taxonomic name, because 18th century naturalists apparently decided subtlety was for cowards. It sits within the Basidiomycota, the same enormous branch of the fungal kingdom that also gives us portobellos, chanterelles, and puffballs, although calling the stinkhorn a cousin of the mushroom on your pizza feels a bit like calling a great white shark a cousin of your goldfish. Technically accurate, not really the point anyone's making when they say it. Biologically, this fungus is a saprotroph, which is a fancy way of saying it doesn't kill anything to survive. It eats what's already dead. Fallen branches, decaying leaf litter, old wood chips, the soggy organic debris nobody else wants. For most of the year, the fungus exists as an enormous, completely invisible network of thread-like filaments called hyphae, quietly threading through the mulch beneath your feet, doing the unglamorous but genuinely essential work of turning dead plant matter back into usable soil. You would never know it was there. That's the fungus's normal, respectable, extremely boring day job. And then, for a handful of days each year, usually stretching from late summer into autumn, it stops being subtle. It throws every resource it has into building a single, upright, unmistakable structure with one very specific goal: get itself smelled by every fly within roughly 200 meters. Everything about what happens next, the shape, the color, the slime, the deeply unfortunate smell, exists for exactly one biological reason. Understanding that reason is going to make the rest of this video make a lot more sense. But first, we need to talk about how this thing is actually born, because the birth of a stinkhorn might be even weirder than the adult. Before Phallus imputicus becomes the mushroom that ruins somebody's Tuesday afternoon, it starts life as something mycologists have nicknamed, with admirable restraint, the witch's egg. It's a small, whitish, or faintly pinkish sphere, usually somewhere around 1.5 to 2 inches across, sitting just beneath the soil surface, looking for all the world like something a small reptile might have left behind. People who dig one up before they know what it is very frequently assume they've stumbled onto a snake nest.
or possibly evidence of a crime scene involving a very small victim. Slice one open, and plenty of foragers have, and you'll find a genuinely strange layered structure. Beneath a tough, leathery outer skin called the vulva, there's a translucent, jelly-like cushioning layer, and nestled at the center, a compact, gelatinous mass that already contains, in perfect miniature, every part of the adult mushroom. The stalk, the cap, all of it, folded and compressed like a car engine's worth of parts crammed into a shoebox. It is, essentially, a pre-assembled mushroom kit, vacuum-packed and waiting for a signal to deploy, which, biologically speaking, is more or less exactly what it is.
That signal comes fast, and once conditions are right, enough moisture, enough warmth, the egg ruptures. And what happens next is one of the more genuinely impressive speed records in the entire fungal and plant world. The stalk doesn't grow the way a tree grows, slowly adding new cells over weeks and months. It's already got every cell it will ever need, pre-formed and tightly compressed. Growth happens almost entirely through rapid cell elongation. The existing cells absorb water and inflate all at once, like a stack of tiny balloons filling simultaneously, which is exactly why a stinkhorn can go from a buried egg to a fully upright, towering mushroom in a matter of hours. Field observers have documented the fastest cases, finishing the entire transformation start to finish in just a few hours. You could genuinely watch this happen over the course of a single lunch break, which is either delightful or deeply unsettling, depending entirely on your personal relationship with mushrooms. So what actually comes out of that egg? A tall, white, spongy, hollow stalk, honeycombed on the inside like packing foam, which is precisely why it can grow so fast and stand so tall while using so little actual building material. It's strong enough to punch straight up through compacted soil, through bark mulch, and, according to more than one exasperated gardener online, straight through landscaping fabric that was specifically installed to stop exactly that kind of thing. At the top sits a conical, pitted cap, and that cap is where this fungus's entire life strategy comes together. Fresh out of the egg, it's coated in a thick, dark olive-green slime called the gleba. This isn't decoration. The gleba is the ball-bearing layer, the fungus's entire reproductive payload, packed into a slick, glistening coating that looks, to put it gently, exactly like something you'd expect to find on roadkill. That resemblance is not an accident, it's the entire plan. We'll get to exactly why in a minute, because the smell deserves a chapter of its own, literally. Underneath all that slime, once insects have carried it away, you can finally see the cap's true surface, a raised, off-white honeycombed texture, not unlike the surface of a morel if a morel had made some very different life choices somewhere along the way. A thin white ring sits where the cap meets the stalk, the mushroom's one understated, almost polite accessory in an otherwise extremely loud outfit. And that outfit doesn't last. A mature stinkhorn typically collapses and rots away within a day or two of fully emerging, meaning the whole spectacular, scandalous show, egg to full height to collapse, plays out on a timescale you could fit inside a long weekend. All right, let's actually answer the question from the top of the video, because you came here for numbers and you deserve numbers. A mature common stinkhorn typically stands somewhere between 4 and 10 inches tall, with especially large specimens pushing right up against that 10-inch ceiling. The cap itself usually runs about 1.5 to 2 inches long and roughly an inch across. For context, a big stinkhorn is landing somewhere in the same height as a can of soda standing on end, except considerably less welcome at a picnic and considerably more likely to end up on someone's local news "You won't believe what's growing in this backyard" segment. The egg it emerged from, by comparison, was only about 1.5 to 2 inches across, meaning this mushroom can multiply its visible height something like 4 or 5 times over in the space of a single day. Imagine going to bed as yourself and waking up 5 times taller. That's the growth spurt we're talking about here, minus the awkward new clothes shopping trip. No wonder the people who find one first thing in the morning are so convinced it wasn't there the night before. Statistically, it probably wasn't. Okay, it's time. Let's talk about the smell, because at this point you've probably already imagined it and you're not thrilled about it. Stinkhorn enthusiasts, and yes, that is a real category of person, will tell you that you smell a mature Phallus impudicus before you ever see it. The odor gets compared to rotting meat, to roadkill baking in the sun, to a dumpster having a genuinely bad week, and mycologists who study this professionally have generally landed on carrion as the polite scientific summary. It's not subtle, and it's been reported detectable from a considerable distance downwind, which means this fungus is essentially running a smell advertisement broadcast to an entire neighborhood of flies it hasn't even met yet.
And here's where the science gets genuinely fascinating. Because that smell isn't some lazy accident of decay, it's a precisely engineered chemical cocktail. Researchers running gas chromatography and mass spectrometry on Stinkhorn gleba have identified dozens of individual volatile compounds, but the true headline offenders belong to a family of sulfur-based molecules called dimethyl oligosulfides. Things like dimethyl disulfide and especially dimethyl trisulfide. If that last name rings a bell, here's why. It's the exact same compound responsible for the smell of certain infected wounds in human medicine, and it's a known contributor to the odor of decomposing flesh generally. This mushroom has independently discovered one of nature's most efficient "something has died here" chemical signals, and it is using it entirely on purpose. Layered on top of that sulfurous foundation are additional compounds like phenylacetaldehyde and a couple of genuinely floral-smelling terpenes, linalool and ocimene, the same kinds of molecules you'd find in actual flowers. Which sounds contradictory until you realize the goal here was never to smell pleasant or unpleasant by human standards. The goal is to smell exactly right to one very specific audience: carrion flies, blowflies, and other insects that make their entire living finding dead things. To them, this cocktail reads as a 5-star dining alert. They land, they feed on the gleba, spores stick to their legs and bodies, and off they go, unknowingly planting the next generation of stinkhorns somewhere else in the forest. This mushroom doesn't bother relying on wind to scatter its spores the way most fungi do. It hired delivery drivers. The drivers just happen to be flies, and the payment is garbage-scented goo. There's one more twist worth knowing, because it turns the smell from gross fact into genuinely fascinating fact. The odor only shows up at the mature stage. At the witch's egg, stage before rupture, the fungus is completely odorless, which is exactly why so many curious foragers have accidentally sliced one open, expecting nothing, only to discover the interior looks nothing like what they were picturing. And the flies don't waste any time. Blowflies and flesh flies, the same broad insect crowd that shows up for actual carrion, are drawn in with startling speed once a cap ruptures and starts releasing its cocktail into the air, sometimes arriving within minutes of the smell first hitting the breeze. Watch a mature stinkhorn for even a short while, and you'll usually see a small rotating cast of flies crawling over the gleba, feeding, taking off, and being replaced by the next arrival, all completely unbothered by the smell that's currently making you take several large steps backward. Here's the part that tends to genuinely surprise people. Yes, humans eat this mushroom, on purpose, repeatedly. There are recipes. The key detail is timing. Nobody in their right mind is slicing up a fully mature, reeking, slime-covered stinkhorn for dinner. But back at the witch's egg stage, before it ruptures, before the smell ever develops, while it's still sealed inside that tough outer skin, the inside tells a completely different story.
Crack one open at that stage, and you'll find a firm, white, translucent core that foragers across parts of France, Germany, and the British Isles have quietly been enjoying for generations. In German, it's traditionally called Hexenei, witch's egg, and it shows up sliced into soups, fried in butter, pickled, or eaten raw straight from the shell with a bit of salt. The consensus on flavor is remarkably consistent across the people who've actually tried it. It tastes like a radish with the crisp, watery crunch of a water chestnut. Some describe a faint nutty note underneath, almost like raw peanut. It's not mushroomy in the slightest. It eats more like a strange root vegetable that wandered into the wrong kingdom of life. And it apparently holds on to that crunch even after cooking, a texture trick most actual vegetables can't pull off. There are old folk traditions in parts of Europe claiming the dried, powdered, mature fungus was used as a livestock aphrodisiac, a claim modern science has done absolutely nothing to substantiate, but which tells you everything about how humans have reacted to a mushroom shaped like this one for centuries. The same shape-based logic shows up again with a related species prized in parts of Asia, where it's long been rumored to boost virility, again for reasons that have far more to do with appearance than actual chemistry. One important note before you go hunting for a stinkhorn omelette: this is genuinely one of the riskier fun fact foods to try casually, and we'll walk through exactly why in a few minutes, because it involves one of the most dangerous mushrooms on Earth, wearing a nearly identical disguise. Let's talk about the name, because you asked, and honestly, it's a great story. This mushroom was formerly named Phallus impudicus by Carl Linnaeus himself in 1753 in his foundational work Species Plantarum, the same book, incidentally, that laid the groundwork for how scientists name essentially every living organism on Earth to this day. Linnaeus, for all his genius, was not a man who reached for euphemism. Phallus is about as literal as scientific naming gets, describing the mushroom's unmistakable shape outright. Impudicus is Latin for shameless or immodest. Put the two together and you get, essentially, the shameless phallus, which might be the single most accurate scientific name ever assigned to any organism, in the sense that it requires zero biology background to understand exactly what you're looking at. It wasn't the first time naturalists had struggled to describe this thing with a straight face either. More than a century and a half before Linnaeus, the English botanist John Gerard wrote about it in his 1597 Herbal, reaching for cautious, evasive Latin phrasing rather than plain English description. A few decades later, fellow botanist John Parkinson gave it an entirely different, almost comically roundabout nickname, referencing a certain profession's tools. For roughly 200 years, scientific writers kept circling this mushroom with polite discomfort before Linnaeus finally just said the quiet part out loud in Latin. The mushroom's common names lean into the same energy. English speakers over the centuries assembled a whole rotating cast of blunt nicknames. Devil's dipstick is one of the more printable ones still in circulation today, alongside regional names elsewhere in the world that translate to things like devil's egg and dead man's fingers. Basically, wherever this mushroom has popped up out of the ground, humans have looked at it, gone bright red, and immediately reached for the most dramatic name available on the shelf. And nowhere did humans react more dramatically than in Victorian England, where this mushroom accidentally kicked off a one-woman war. The story comes from Gwen Raverat's 1952 memoir, Period Piece, about growing up in the extended Darwin family. Yes, that Darwin. Raverat wrote about her aunt, Henrietta or Etty Darwin, Charles Darwin's own eldest daughter, who developed what can only be described as a highly specialized hobby, hunting stinkhorns to extinction, one patch of woodland at a time. According to the memoir,
Etty would head out into the woods near her home, dressed in a special hunting cloak and gloves, armed with a basket and a sharpened stick, tracking the mushrooms purely by scent, sniffing her way through the undergrowth like a bloodhound until she caught a whiff of her target. Once located, she'd spear it and drop it into her basket. At the end of the day, the entire haul would be smuggled back to the house and burned in secret in the drawing room fireplace with the door locked. Why the secrecy? According to Raverat, it was all done in Etty's own reported justification because of the morals of the maids, the idea being that the household's young female servants simply could not be trusted to encounter a mushroom shaped like this one without their moral character taking some kind of hit. It's a wonderfully absurd piece of logic, and it tells you everything you need to know about Victorian anxieties, essentially none of which had anything to do with actual mycology. Raverat herself, writing decades later with the benefit of hindsight, suspected her aunt genuinely enjoyed the hunt itself, far more than any real concern for anybody's morals, sport dressed up as virtue. Which, frankly, makes Etty Darwin one of history's more entertaining amateur mycologists, even if her research methodology leaned heavily on arson. The broader point here is bigger than one eccentric Victorian aunt with a stick. For centuries, this mushroom's shape made it borderline unmentionable in polite scientific and social circles across Europe. It's a genuinely rare case of an organism that got tangled up with human anxieties about sex and morality for hundreds of years, purely because of what it happens to look like for about 48 hours out of an entire year.
Which brings us finally to the actual theme of this video. This is a mushroom that everyone mistakes for something else at every single stage of its life. And the list of things people have mistaken it for is genuinely one of the best parts of researching it. Start at the beginning. The witch's egg, sitting half buried in the mulch, gets mistaken constantly for a puffball, another edible fungus that also starts life as a pale, roundish blob, leading more than one excited forager to think they've hit the jackpot before slicing it open and discovering a very different, much more dramatic interior. Other foragers, digging one up mid-cycle, have reported thinking they'd found a golf ball, a mysterious egg from some unidentified animal, or, in a surprisingly common theme across gardening forums, an actual reptile egg, which has led to more than one person gently reburying what they believed was a snake nest, only to have a fully formed stinkhorn erupt from the ground days later, like the world's strangest plot twist. Then there's the fully mature stage, which, let's be honest, doesn't get mistaken for anything else at all. Homeowners who find one popping up out of freshly laid mulch have, according to countless local gardening forums and more than a few Weird Find of the Week news segments, assumed at various points that they were looking at a discarded object that definitely didn't belong in a flower bed, evidence of vandalism, or proof that some neighborhood creature had left behind something deeply unfortunate. Dogs, for their part, are frequent first responders to a stinkhorn sighting, not for scientific reasons, purely because the smell reads to a dog as an absolute must investigate, which has led to more than one bewildered pet owner sprinting across the yard yelling "drop it" at a mushroom. Everybody, in other words, knows exactly what this mushroom looks like the moment they see it fully grown, which is precisely the problem, and precisely why it's generated more panicked group chats among gardeners than almost any other fungus in North America. Now, all of that is genuinely funny. This next part isn't. And if you take away one practical piece of information from this entire video, make it this one. At the witch's egg stage, before it's identifiable by shape or smell, Phallus imputicus can closely resemble the immature egg stage of some of the most dangerous mushrooms on the planet, specifically species in the genus Amanita, which includes the deathcap and the destroying angel. These are not mushrooms you want to guess wrong about. The deathcap, eaten at its own smooth button-like egg stage, is responsible for the overwhelming majority of fatal mushroom poisonings recorded worldwide. And at that early stage, an inexperienced forager looking at a pale, half-buried leaf-litter sphere genuinely cannot always tell the difference by sight alone. Earthballs, another look-alike, this time a solid black mass inside rather than anything remotely edible, round out the lineup of things a stinkhorn egg gets confused with. The reliable way experienced foragers tell them apart is by cutting the egg open. A stinkhorn egg reveals that distinctive layered structure, outer skin, jelly cushioning layer, and, crucially, the compressed dark olive-green glebe already visible in miniature at the core. An amanita button, by contrast, shows the developing outline of a cap and gills, with no green slime layer anywhere in sight. A puffball, for comparison, is uniformly white and spongy all the way through, with none of that internal layering at all. But here's the catch. That check only genuinely works if you already know precisely what you're looking for and feel confident in what you're seeing, which is exactly the problem with casual just cut it open and check advice for anyone without real hands-on foraging experience. This is one of those rare cases where it's probably fine, it looked like the one I saw online, has ended very, very badly for real people. If you're not 100% certain, the answer is simple: don't eat it. And if you're genuinely serious about foraging witches' eggs, learn from someone experienced in person before you ever put one anywhere near your mouth. Felis impudicus isn't traveling alone through the forest. It's got relatives, and North America has its own homegrown cast of stinkhorn characters worth knowing. East of the Mississippi, the common stinkhorn actually plays second fiddle to its close cousin, Phallus ravenelli, Ravenel's stinkhorn, which takes over as the more typical species across much of the eastern United States, looking and behaving almost identically, right down to the smell. West of the Mississippi and across much of Europe, Felis impudicus itself tends to dominate. Either way, if you're in North America and you find a classic tall, white and olive stinkhorn, there's a solid chance you're looking at one of these two nearly interchangeable cousins. Then things get genuinely more exotic. Mutinus canis, the aptly named dog stinkhorn, is smaller, slimmer, and noticeably less overpowering in the smell department, and often turns up in the very same mulch beds as its larger relative. Interestingly, its dried eggs are actually sold commercially in parts of China, both as a food and, reportedly, for their assumed medicinal value, proof that one region's garden nuisance is another region's grocery item. It's easy, after all this, to think of Felis impudicus purely as the class clown of the fungal kingdom, and honestly, it's earned that reputation fair and square. But underneath the smell, the shape, and 2 centuries of scandalized Victorians, this fungus is quietly doing genuinely important ecological work that almost nobody ever thanks it for. As a saprotroph, it's part of the enormous, largely invisible workforce of decomposer fungi responsible for breaking down dead wood, fallen leaves, and other organic debris into the nutrients that feed everything else in the forest. Without decomposers like this one working all the clock beneath the surface, forest floors would simply accumulate dead material indefinitely, locking away nutrients that new plants desperately need to grow. The unglamorous truth is that a functioning forest ecosystem needs its stinkhorns just as much as it needs its towering oaks. One just gets a lot more attention on social media, usually for exactly the wrong reasons. If all of this has you newly curious rather than newly horrified, here's the good news. You probably don't have to travel far to find one. Felis impudicus and its close relatives are genuinely widespread across the United States, which is part of why so many Americans end up Googling some version of "weird phallic mushroom in my yard, help" every single autumn. Timing matters most. Look from late summer through the end of autumn, after a good stretch of rain followed by warm, humid weather. Those are exactly the conditions that trigger a witch's egg to finally rupture. Habitat matters almost as much. This fungus loves rich, decaying wood debris, which means mulched garden beds, wood chip playgrounds, compost piles, and the leaf litter of mixed deciduous forests are all prime real estate. It's been documented from mulch beds in Texas state parks to shaded woodlands across the Pacific Northwest, and it's especially common through much of the northeastern United States, where its close cousin, Ravenel stinkhorn, frequently takes over the exact same ecological niche. Because the fungus tends to fruit in loose clusters from a shared underground network, finding one egg or one mature stalk is usually a good sign there are several more nearby at various stages, just waiting for their turn. And here's a genuinely useful tip straight from people who spent years tracking these things down on purpose. Don't bother scanning the ground with your eyes first. Follow your nose. Once you've caught that unmistakable rotting meat smell on the breeze, mature stinkhorns are almost embarrassingly easy to walk right to. It's not exactly a subtle scavenger hunt. So, why does this mushroom look so strange? Because that exact shape is structurally perfect for punching up through soil and mulch at record speed. How many inches does it grow? Typically 4 to 10, ballooning up from a 2-inch egg in as little as a few hours. Does the name actually match what people think it looks like? Yes, emphatically, on purpose, courtesy of Carl Linnaeus back in 1753. Why does it smell so bad? A precisely engineered blend of sulfur compounds evolved specifically to smell like death to the exact flies that spread its spores. And what does it actually taste like, at least in that early egg stage? Radish with a water chestnut crunch, apparently good enough to have fed European foragers for generations. Phallus imputicus is proof that a mushroom doesn't need to be pretty, doesn't need to smell nice, and definitely doesn't need to avoid scandalizing an entire Victorian household in order to be genuinely fascinating. It's a decomposer, a chemist, a fly whisperer, an accidental comedian, and, for about 48 hours a year, a strange little vegetable-flavored delicacy hiding inside a very unfortunate-looking egg. If your own garden has ever produced one of these, and you had a moment of pure, unfiltered panic before figuring out what you were actually looking at, you are absolutely not alone. And now you know exactly what you saw and why it exists. Next time that unmistakable smell drifts across your path on a fall afternoon in the woods, you'll know there's a whole strange, brilliant biological strategy behind it, not just a bad smell ruining your hike. If you learned something weird and wonderful today, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into the fungal kingdom's strangest residents, and drop a comment telling us what you thought this mushroom was the very first time you saw it. See you in the next video.